Admiral Park Huan-woo rubbed his tired eyes and leaned back in his chair. The green glow from the holographic display cast strange shadows across his face as he read the same report for the 10th time. 3 years of work had led to this moment, and he still couldn't believe what he was seeing. The translation program had been running day and night, breaking down the alien language bit by bit. Every intercepted message, every scattered communication from deep space had been fed into the system. The computer worked tirelessly, finding patterns in the strange symbols and sounds that came from somewhere beyond the stars. Park had expected many things when they finally cracked the code. Maybe trade offers, scientific exchanges, or even threats of war. He had not expected fear. Pure, overwhelming fear, directed at Earth and everyone on it. The first translated message had arrived 3 days ago. Park remembered the moment clearly. He had been drinking his morning coffee when Lieutenant Yu burst into his office, tablet in hand and excitement written across her face. "Sir, we got something big," she had said, nearly dropping the device in a rush. Translation program. "Just finished processing the batch from Sector 7. Park had set down his coffee and taken the tablet. The words on the screen made no sense at first. References to death worlds, apex predators, and something called the Endless Hunt. It read like a horror story, not a military report. But as more translations came in, the pattern became clear. The aliens weren't talking about some distant threat or ancient enemy. They were talking about Earth. They were talking about humans. Park stood up from his desk and walked to the large window that looked out over the military base. Ships moved in the distance, their lights blinking as they prepared for routine patrols. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. It was hard to imagine that somewhere in the darkness of space, an entire civilization was building weapons to keep these same ships from leaving their solar system. The door chimed, and Captain Lee Minho entered the office. Lee carried a thick folder under his arm and wore the expression of someone who had not slept in days. As head of xenological analysis, he had been working around the clock to understand what they were dealing with. Admiral Lee said, placing the folder on the desk, "I have the complete analysis ready for the council meeting." Park nodded and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Give me the short version first." Lee sat down and opened the folder. "We've translated over 2,000 individual communications from what we're calling the hegemony. It's a coalition of 12 different alien species, and they've been the dominant power in this part of the galaxy for at least 3,000 years. And they know about us," Park said. "It wasn't a question. They know about us. They've been watching us, and they're absolutely terrified," Lee replied. "Admiral, these species evolved very differently from humans. They're prey animals that developed intelligence as a survival mechanism. They've never encountered a predator species that achieved space travel." Park picked up one of the translated documents. The alien words had been replaced with Korean text, but the meaning was clear enough. The report described Earth as a death world, a planet so hostile that only the most dangerous creatures could survive there. Humans were described as pack hunters who never gave up, who could chase their prey across vast distances without rest. "They think we're monsters," Park said quietly. "From their perspective, we are," Lee replied. "They've spent their entire evolutionary history running from predators. The idea of a species that hunts for sport, that fights wars for territory, that can survive in almost any environment, it's their worst nightmare come to life." Park set down the document and looked at his captain. "What about the defensive stations?" Lee's expression grew more serious. "We've identified at least 47 major installations along the galactic rim. They're not weapons platforms designed to attack Earth. They're containment systems built to keep us from expanding into space. The aliens have been building them for over a century, ever since they first detected our radio signals." The implications hit Park like a physical blow. Humanity had been dreaming of the stars for generations, imagining the day when they would meet other intelligent life and join a galactic community. Instead, they had discovered that the galaxy already knew about them and had decided they were too dangerous to be allowed to spread. "They're building a cage," Park said. "Yes, sir, a very sophisticated cage." Park stood up and walked back to the window. The ships outside continued their routine patrols. unaware that their very existence was seen as a threat by civilizations they had never met. He thought about the generations of humans who had looked up at the stars with wonder and hope, never knowing that those same stars were home to species that feared their approach. The door chimed again, and Lieutenant Yu entered with another tablet. "Admiral, we have an urgent communication from Earth Command. They're asking for your immediate assessment." Park took the tablet and quickly read the message. The discovery of the alien communications had reached the highest levels of government. Earth's leaders wanted to know what humanity was facing and what options they had. Lee stood up and closed his folder. "What do we tell them, sir?" Park looked at the translated documents scattered across his desk, then at the ships beyond his window. The choice was clear, even if it wasn't easy. "We tell them the truth," he said finally. "Earth's first contact with alien civilization won't be a meeting of equals. It's going to be a prison break." Dr. Kim So-young stared at her computer screen, her coffee growing cold beside her keyboard. The data files from the hegemony networks filled her monitor with alien symbols and translated text. For 6 months, she had been diving deep into their culture, trying to understand how these creatures thought and lived. What she found kept her awake at night. The first thing that struck her was how different they were from humans. Every single species in the hegemony had evolved from animals that were hunted by other creatures. They were plant eaters, creatures that had survived by running away, hiding, or working together to stay safe. Their entire way of thinking was built around avoiding danger and protecting each other. Kim scrolled through a document about hegemony history. The aliens had developed space travel not through competition or conquest, but through cooperation. When resources ran low on one planet, they simply moved to another. When they met other species, they formed alliances and shared technology. War was almost unknown among them because they all understood what it meant to be prey. She pulled up another file, this one containing what appeared to be religious texts. The aliens had myths and legends just like humans did, but their stories were very different. Instead of heroes who fought monsters, they told tales of great protectors who kept the darkness at bay. Their gods were shields and shelters, not warriors or hunters. But one story appeared in every culture across all 12 species. They called it the Endless Hunt, and it was their version of the end of the world. According to their mythology, someday a race of perfect predators would emerge from the empty space between stars. These creatures would hunt without mercy, never stopping, never giving up, until every living thing in the galaxy was destroyed. Kim read the description of these mythical monsters with growing unease. The ancient texts described bipedal creatures with eyes that faced forward like a hunter rather than to the sides like prey. They were said to hunt in packs, communicating with each other to corner their victims. Most terrifying of all, they were said to be persistence hunters, creatures that would chase their prey across vast distances, never stopping even when exhausted. She leaned back in her chair and looked at her reflection in the dark window. 2 eyes stared back at her, positioned at the front of her face for judging distance and tracking movement. She thought about human history, about how our ancestors had hunted large animals by chasing them until they collapsed from exhaustion. She thought about how humans worked together in groups, how they never gave up when pursuing a goal. The mythical monsters from alien nightmares sounded exactly like humans. Kim opened a new file. This one containing scientific reports from someone named Choi Haejin. He was apparently the hegemony's top expert on dangerous species, and he had written extensively about what he called the theoretical nightmare species. Its analysis was detailed and scientific, but it read like a description of humanity. According to Choi's reports, the most dangerous possible creature would be one that evolved on a death world, a planet so hostile that only the strongest and most adaptable could survive. This creature would be a generalist, able to eat almost anything and live in almost any environment. It would be intelligent enough to use tools and work in groups, but aggressive enough to compete for resources through violence. Kim felt a chill as she read further. Choi had predicted that such a species would develop technology quickly because of their aggressive nature. They would explore space not for cooperation, but for conquest. They would see other species not as potential allies, but as either threats to be eliminated or resources to be used. The report concluded that if such a species ever emerged, the only hope for galactic civilization would be to contain them before they could spread. Choi recommended building massive defensive networks around any system where such creatures might evolve, creating an unbreakable cage to keep them trapped. Kim stood up and walked to her window. The military base spread out below her, with ships and soldiers moving in organized patterns. I thought about Earth's history, about the wars and conquests that had shaped human civilization. She thought about how humans had explored every corner of their planet, had climbed the highest mountains, and dove to the deepest oceans. Driven by an endless need to see what lay beyond the next horizon, she pulled up the files on hegemony military doctrine. Everything made sense now. Their entire defense strategy was based on the idea that someday the creatures from their nightmares would come. They had spent centuries building walls and barriers, creating safe zones where their civilization could hide from the ultimate predator. The irony was overwhelming. While humans had been dreaming of meeting friendly aliens and joining a galactic community, those same aliens had been preparing for war against creatures that matched human description perfectly. The hegemony's greatest fear had always been humanity, even before they knew humans existed. Kim sat back down at her computer and began typing her report. Earth's leaders needed to understand what they were facing. This wasn't just about different species meeting for the first time. It was about prophecy becoming reality, about nightmares coming true. The galaxy's dominant civilization had been preparing for humanity's arrival since before humans had invented writing. The monsters from their darkest legends were already building starships in a distant solar system. And soon those ships would be ready to fly. Commander Young Taemin floated in the observation pod of the stealth ship, watching the massive structure that hung in space before them. The fortress was bigger than anything humanity had ever built, a dark metal sphere covered in weapon ports and shield generators. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like a work of art designed to kill. First visual contact confirmed, reported Sergeant Park from the pilot's seat. We're maintaining safe distance, but the sensors are getting good readings. Aang nodded, without taking his eyes off the fortress. This was the third installation they had found in the past week, and each one was more impressive than the last. The hegemony had built these stations to last forever, massive monuments to their fear of what might come from Earth's direction. Take us around to the far side, Young ordered. I want to see how they've positioned the weapons. The ship moved silently through space, its stealth systems hiding them from the fortress sensors. As they circled the installation, Yang counted the weapon emplacements. Thousands of them, each one powerful enough to destroy a human battleship. The fortress could probably hold off an entire fleet by itself, but something bothered him about the design. All the weapons pointed in the same direction, away from Earth and toward the galactic core. It was as if the fortress builders expected their enemy to come from inside the galaxy, not from the rim where Earth was located. Commander called Lieutenant Nam Dayun from the analysis station. I'm picking up supply ships on the far side. They're coming from deeper in the galaxy. Young pushed himself over to her station and looked at the display. 3 large cargo vessels were approaching the fortress, their hulls marked with symbols from different hegemony species. The ships moved slowly and predictably, following what was obviously a regular supply route. They're not even trying to hide, Yang muttered. No escorts, no defensive maneuvers. They're flying like they own this space. 'Cause they do, Nam replied. Look at this sensor data. The fortress has been here for at least 50 years, maybe longer. This is their territory, and they've never had to worry about anyone challenging them. Young studied the tactical display as more information came in. The fortress was positioned perfectly to block any expansion from Earth's solar system, but its design made no sense for an offensive weapon. Every system was built for defense, for holding a position against an attacking force. They're not planning to attack Earth, he realized. They're planning to contain us. Anam pulled up more data. On her screen? Sir, we've mapped 17 of these fortresses so far. They form a perfect sphere around our local stellar neighborhood. No matter which direction we try to expand, we'll run into one of these installations. Yang felt a chill run down his spine. The scale of what they were seeing was beyond anything he had imagined. The hegemony had built a cage around Earth, a prison made of fortified worlds and defensive stations. They had spent decades, maybe centuries, preparing for the day when humanity would try to leave their home system. "What about the other side?" he asked. "The side facing Earth?" Nam worked at her console for a moment, then shook her head. Minimal defenses. Few sensor arrays, some communication equipment, but no major weapons. It's like they never considered that someone might attack from that direction. Yang stared at the fortress through the observation port. The massive structure rotated slowly, its weapon-covered surface facing away from Earth. The builders had created the perfect defensive position. But they had made a critical error. They had assumed their enemy would behave like they did. "Sergeant." "Park," Yang called. "Take us to the next fortress on the list. I want to see if they're all built the same way." The ship moved away from the installation, leaving the fortress to continue its silent watch. As they traveled deeper into the defensive network, Yang began to understand the alien mindset. Every fortress was positioned to hold a line, to prevent expansion, rather than to launch an attack. The weapon systems all faced outward, the supply lines ran from the galactic interior, and the defensive positions were designed to repel invasion from the core worlds. The fourth fortress they visited was even larger than the others, obviously a command center for the local defensive network. Yang watched as ships moved in and out of the installation, following patterns that had probably been established decades ago. Everything was routine, predictable, safe. "They've never fought a war," Nam said quietly. "Not a real one. How they move, how they position their ships. They're following procedures, not reacting to threats." Yang nodded. The hegemony had built their military around the concept of holding ground, of creating safe zones where their civilization could hide from danger. They had never developed the ability to take initiative, to strike first, to turn defense in two. "Offense, Lieutenant," he said. "I want you to compile all our intelligence into a complete tactical assessment. Focus on weaknesses, supply lines, communication networks. Everything we've learned about how they think and fight." Nam smiled as she began entering data into her computer. "They built the perfect cage, Commander, but they forgot to account for what happens when the predator doesn't want to be caged." Yang looked back at the fortress network spreading out around them. The hegemony had spent centuries preparing for humanity's arrival, but they had prepared for the wrong kind of war. They expected humans to behave like prey animals, to wait for the cage to close before trying to escape. They had no idea that humans might choose to break out. First, General Kong Ji-hoon stood before the Emergency War Council in the underground, command center beneath Seoul. The room was filled with Earth's most senior military leaders, their faces grim as they studied the holographic displays showing the fortress network that surrounded their solar system. The weight of humanity's future rested on the decisions made in this room. "The situation is clear," Kong began, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to propose. "We have two choices. We can wait for the hegemony to complete their containment system and trap us forever, or we can act now, while we still have the element of surprise." Admiral Park leaned forward in his chair. "What are you suggesting, General?" Kong activated a new display that showed Earth's expanding fleet positions. "We break out before they can lock us in, but we don't do it the way they expect. We don't mass our forces for a direct assault on their fortresses. Instead, we use what makes us human against them." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. This wasn't going to be a conventional military operation. It was going to be something the galaxy had never seen before: the reconnaissance. "Teams have identified a critical weakness in their defensive network," Kong continued. "The hegemony thinks like prey animals. They build walls and wait for the attack to come. They've never considered that the predator might already be inside the cage." Dr. Kim So-young, who had been analyzing hegemony culture for months, stood up from her seat. "And their entire psychology is built around fear of the unknown. They've spent centuries imagining what humanity might be like, and their fears have grown far beyond reality. We can use that against them." Kong nodded. "Exactly. Small teams of operatives will infiltrate the fortress network. They'll pose as refugees, survivors fleeing from Earth's expanding military aggression. The hegemony will want to interrogate them, to learn everything they state. can about the threat they've been preparing for. Captain Lee Minnow raised his hand. And while they're focused on these fake refugees, our real forces will be positioning for coordinated strikes. Precisely, Kong replied. But the infiltration. Teams won't just be gathering intelligence, they'll be psychological warfare specialists. Every story they tell, every piece of information they provide, will be designed to increase the hegemony's fear and confusion. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of fighting the hegemony's preconceptions about humanity, they would embrace them. The aliens expected humans to be unpredictable, adaptable, and terrifyingly effective. The infiltration teams would become exactly what the hegemony feared most. Major. Shin the Jin stepped forward from her position near the back of the room. General, I volunteered to lead the infiltration teams. Kang looked at her personnel file on his tablet. Shin had the perfect psychological profile for the mission. She was calm under extreme pressure, able to adapt to any situation, and had an unusual ability to inspire complete loyalty in her subordinates. More importantly, she understood the kind of fear they were dealing with. Major, this mission will require you to become the nightmare they've been imagining, Kong said. You'll need to convince them that you're exactly the kind of monster they've been preparing for, while gathering intelligence on their defenses and sowing confusion in their ranks. Shin smiled grimly. I understand, sir. Give them exactly what they expect to see. The psychological warfare aspect was crucial to the plan's success. The hegemony had spent centuries building up their fear of humanity, creating elaborate myths about the threat from Earth. Now that fear would be turned into a weapon. The infiltration teams would appear suddenly at different fortresses, each one carrying stories of Earth's military expansion and humanity's growing aggression. The beauty of this approach, Dr. Kim explained, is that it plays into their existing beliefs. They already think we're unpredictable and dangerous. When our operatives start appearing at their installations, it will confirm their worst fears about human capabilities. Admiral Park studied the tactical displays. And while they're dealing with the psychological pressure, our main fleet will be moving into position. Our ships will approach from multiple directions simultaneously, Kong confirmed. The fortress network is designed to repel invasion from the galactic core, but we'll be attacking from the rim. By the time they realize what's happening, we'll have already compromised their defensive positions. The plan required perfect timing. The infiltration teams would need to maintain their cover while feeding information back to Earth. The main fleet would need to position itself without being detected. Most importantly, the psychological warfare would need to create enough confusion and fear to prevent the hegemony from organizing an effective response. How long do we have? Asked Colonel Bay from the Intelligence Division. The reconnaissance. Teams estimate we have 6 months before the fortress network reaches full operational capacity, Kang replied. After that, breaking out becomes much more difficult. Major Shin reviewed the mission parameters on her tablet. My teams will need to establish cover identities, learn enough about hegemony culture to pass as refugees, and maintain contact with Earth Command while operating behind enemy lines. You'll also need to be convincing, Dr. Kim added. The hegemony will be suspicious of any humans who approach their installations. Your story will need to be believable enough to get you inside their defenses. Kang looked around the room at the assembled leaders. This operation represents humanity's best chance of avoiding permanent containment. We'll be using the hegemony's own fears against them, turning their defensive psychology into a weakness. The question is, are we ready to become the monsters they think we are? The vote was unanimous. Earth would strike first. Captain O. Subin crouched in the maintenance tunnel beneath Fortress Prime, checking her watch one final time. In 30 seconds, everything would change. Her team had spent 4 months living on this station, posing as refugees from Earth's expanding military. The aliens had treated them with nervous curiosity, asking endless questions about human capabilities while keeping them under constant surveillance. 10 seconds, she whispered into her comm unit. Around the fortress network, 16 other teams were preparing for the same moment. Months of planning, infiltration, psychological warfare had led to this single point in time. The clock hit 0300. Terran Standard Time OL pulled the access panel from the wall and began cutting power lines with practiced efficiency. The aliens had built their fortress to last forever, but they had never considered that the enemy might already be inside. Every system had backup power. Every corridor had multiple access routes. Every defensive position could be turned against its operators. Power grid compromised, she reported as the lights flickered throughout the station. Moving to Phase 2, her team emerged from hidden positions throughout the fortress. Sergeant Chen Menesio led her squad toward the central command center. While Corporal Lim took his people to the communication arrays, they moved like shadows through corridors they had memorized during their months of captivity. The alien defenders responded exactly as expected. They rushed to defensive positions, activated emergency protocols, and began sending distress signals to other fortresses. What they didn't realize was that similar attacks were happening across the entire network at the same moment. O reached the main power distribution center and found it defended by a squad of hegemony soldiers. The aliens were plant eaters, evolved from creatures that had spent millions of years running from predators. Their weapons were designed for defense, their tactics built around holding ground rather than taking it. "Surrender now, and you won't be harmed," called out in the alien language she had learned during her months on the station. The response was a blast of energy that scorched the wall beside her head. The aliens were terrified, but they were also trapped. Their entire military training focused on holding positions, not retreating. They would fight to the death rather than abandon their posts. O signaled to her team, and they moved with the coordination of pack hunters. 2 soldiers provided covering fire while the others flanked the defensive position. The aliens tried to adjust their formation, but they were fighting creatures who had evolved to hunt in groups. The battle for the power center lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, the fortress's main systems were under human control. Meanwhile, Sergeant Chen had reached the command center. The massive room was filled with alien officers coordinating the defense of the entire fortress network. Banks of monitors showed the status of all 17 installations. Chen could see that the attacks were proceeding exactly as planned. "All human teams, report status," came Admiral Park's voice over the COM system. "Fortress Prime secured," O reported. "Central systems under our control." Fortress 7 reporting, came another voice. "Alien command staff requesting terms of surrender." Fortress 12 here. "Local commander wants to negotiate." One by one, the reports came in. The fortress network that had taken the hegemony decades to build was falling in hours. The aliens had prepared for a siege, not for enemies who were already inside their walls. Chen moved through the command center, watching the alien officers work frantically at their stations. They were trying to coordinate a defense against an enemy that fought unlike anything they had ever imagined. Humans didn't mass their forces for direct assault. They appeared everywhere at once, struck without warning, and used the fortress systems against their own crews. "Attention all hegemony personnel," Admiral Park's voice echoed through the station's communication system. "This is Admiral Park of the Terran Defense Force. Your fortress network is under our control. Any crew members who surrender immediately will be treated according to the rules of war." The response was immediate. Across the fortress network, alien commanders began laying down their weapons. They had been trained to defend fixed positions, not to fight an enemy that could appear anywhere and strike from within. The psychological warfare had worked perfectly. The hegemony's fears about human capabilities had become reality. O made her way to the main observation deck, where she could see the space around Fortress Prime. Human ships were materializing. From stealth positions, their weapons trained on the installation, but the weapons weren't firing. There was no need. The fortress was already under human control. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Park watched as the last fortress in the network lowered its shields. The operation had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. The hegemony had spent centuries preparing for humanity's arrival, but they had prepared for the wrong kind of war. "Admiral," reported Captain Lee from the communication station, receiving surrender requests from all 17 fortresses. "The local commanders are asking for terms." Park nodded. The cage was broken, but that was only the beginning. The hegemony would need to understand that humans were not the monsters from their nightmares. They were intelligent predators who chose when and how to hunt, but they were also capable of mercy. Open a channel to all Fortress commanders, Park ordered. Tell them that Earth is prepared to negotiate. But make it clear that the cage they built around our solar system will never be rebuilt. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps that was exactly what it needed. The age of hiding behind walls was over. The age of human expansion had begun.